September 13, 2023 minutes. Would anybody like to entertain a motion to approve those?
I'll move approval.
I didn't catch who that was, so I hope in the room they got
Representative
it.
Jacob.
Great, thank you. Second?
Second.
Weber seconds?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just for the record, I believe that Senator Lang is noted as absent. I believe he did arrive at the meeting late, so we probably should correct the record to show that he attended our last meeting.
We can do that. Let's see, so go back and amend the motion to include any corrections.
So move.
And a second, please.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. So we have the motion seconded to approve the minutes with the correction as noted by Mr. Stark. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. Minutes are approved as corrected. All right. So the third order of business is a presentation. And I would just like to highlight that this is a presentation. We will not be taking any actions or motions. So happy to have discussion, but I just want to make sure everybody is aware that we will not be taking any action or motions. We're listening and discussing the presentation. So with that, I will let our presenters take over.
Madam Chair, I believe Mr. Broberg is our first presenter, and he is here via Zoom. So Jeff, are you there?
While we're waiting, I will take this opportunity to say thank you, everyone, for your patience. We're having a little bit of technical glitches this morning, so I say thank you for your patience. I'm not showing Mr. Broberg online.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think maybe given that we should move on to the presentation from the Center for Environmental Advocacy, and Jeff, I think, was having some kind of Zoom problems, and I think you'll be here later.
Okay, that sounds fine. Is everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Great. All right, please proceed.
Should I sit in this one? Okay.
But you'll be controlling.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. My name is Carly Griffith. I am the Water Program Director at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And we are, one second. So we are here today because of action we took to address the persistent contamination of both public and private water supplies in southeast Minnesota with nitrate. At this point, we have likely all seen maps like this and know that nitrate contamination in Minnesota is concentrated in vulnerable groundwater areas like the karst, with karst bedrock or sandy soils like the karst region in southeastern Minnesota and the central sands. We've seen extensive data from Minnesota state agencies that shows the persistent contamination of groundwater aquifers in these areas above the federal human health limit, from statewide ambient groundwater data from as early as the 1990s to over 30,000 tests of private wells in vulnerable townships. What I want to emphasize today, rather than rehash this data, is that the current resources and regulatory support available to people with nitrate-contaminated water supplies, especially private well owners, is not adequate to the crisis. In our petition, we focus on the karst region, where approximately 80,000 people have private wells, and state data shows that 16% of wells that have been tested exceed the federal health limit. In some townships, it's up to 40%. One of the reasons we took this action is because this goes beyond a water quality problem. It's also a critical public health issue. This means we not only need to put better prevention measures in place for the long term, but we also need to provide more immediate relief for impacted communities. We likely all know that the federal health limit of 10 milligrams per liter was set in 1962 to protect against blue baby syndrome, which is a condition that can starve infants of oxygen. But there is a lot of research that has shown an increased risk for example, colorectal cancer at levels as low to 3 to 5 milligrams per liter. So Jeff was supposed to precede this with a discussion of the hydrogeological sensitivity of the karst region. That will follow our presentation. But what we know, because of the hydrogeological sensitivity of the karst region with a thin layer of topsoil and limestone bedrock, we know that surface land use quickly shapes what contaminants are present in the groundwater supply. The bottom line is that the high concentration of feedlots and cropland means high inputs of nitrogen from manure and commercial fertilizer. In fact, cropland sources of land-applied nitrogen that leach into the groundwater account for about 60% of nitrogen in surface waters in the karst region, which is double the statewide average. What this means is that we need broader changes in nutrient management with a greater emphasis on infiltration practices as opposed to reliance on edge-of-field conservation measures. For this work, it is critical to work together with farmers as stewards of the landscape with a shared common goal to protect water at everyone's kitchen sink. So feedlots are under the jurisdiction of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. There are approximately 33,200 feedlots of different sizes with different levels of state regulation in the karst. The state permit system focuses more on CAFOs, which are 1,000 or more animal units. And while CAFOs only account for about 4% of the feedlots in the state, they generate about a third of the manure. However, inspections are few and far between, and there are no requirements to monitor groundwater for discharges. There may also be a need to have a broader transition to best management practices across the landscape that incorporates smaller and mid-sized operations, which could be supported through targeted grant programs tied to nutrient management requirements. Nitrogen overapplication from both manure and commercial fertilizer sources is one of the issues at the root of persistent nitrate contamination. A 2020 study by the Environmental Working Group found that nitrogen overapplication rates, this is beyond the University of Minnesota recommended rates, were highest in livestock-dense areas of the state, where the high amount of manure produced did not correlate to less commercial fertilizer sales. 5 of the 13 counties outlined in the map on the left are where the study found nitrogen from fertilizer and manure sources was over 150% the amount needed to maximize crop yield in the karst. We also know that fall and frozen ground nitrogen application in these vulnerable groundwater areas comes with a higher risk for nitrate contamination. The groundwater protection rule recognized this with restrictions on commercial fertilizer application at those times of year in defined vulnerable areas like the karst and the central sands. But enforceable compliance with best management practices under the rule focuses on public water supplies, which once again leaves private well owners on their own. I'll hand it to Lee.
Can you run that?
Yes.
Is this mic on? Yeah, okay, thanks. Thanks, Carly. I'm Lee Curry. I'm the Director of Strategic Litigation at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And now that you've heard a little bit about the problem facing residents of this region and some of its causes, I want to talk a little bit about the avenue that the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy recently pursued to start to remedy the problem. So we first looked at what state agencies have jurisdiction over groundwater quality in Minnesota. As you can see from this graphic, there are several agencies with pieces of jurisdiction. So the Pollution Control Agency issues permits for certain size feedlots in the state. The Department of Agriculture has jurisdiction over pesticide and commercial fertilizers. And the Department of Health has jurisdiction over public water supplies and administers the well code in Minnesota. But once your well is dug, and whether it was dug before the well code was in place or after the well code was in place, you're on your own in terms of ensuring that the water you're drinking from your tap is safe. And MCA was approached by the Minnesota Well Owners Organization about a year ago asking for help with this crisis of contaminated drinking water in southeastern Minnesota. We don't have all the answers of how to fix this crisis, but we know a few things for sure. We know the drinking water is contaminated. And we know the two main sources of this contamination, as Carly mentioned, feedlots and industrial row crop agriculture, and particularly corn. And you may hear that we are ignoring other sources of nitrate contamination, and that is partially true. And that's because they pale in comparison to these two sources. So this is not an issue that's caused by leaking septic systems or wastewater treatment plants. And we also acknowledge the agencies and the farmers are doing what they can under our current system. They're doing their best not to exacerbate this problem, but we know that the water remains contaminated decades after the agencies have started to try to remedy it, so we know we need to do something different. So we looked at a section of the Safe Drinking Water Act that allows the Environmental Protection Agency to act when there is an imminent and substantial endangerment to human health caused by contamination of an underground source of drinking water. EPA updated its guidance in 2018 on how to use this section on the heels of the Flint, Michigan drinking water crisis. The guidance now states that one of the purposes is to encourage a more widespread use of EPA's Section 1431 authority by more fully explaining the situations where it may be applied. And nitrate contaminated drinking water is called out in the guidance as one of those situations where EPA may step in to assist. And the EPA, if it chooses to use this authority, has broad discretion on how it can act. It can issue administrative or judicial orders to anyone, including state and local governments. So MCA, based on this guidance and the evidence that we had of contamination, submitted information to EPA in April of this year to ask them to step in and assist us in protecting the drinking water in this vulnerable area of Minnesota. And if you can advance, we were joined by 10 other groups that are listed here. They're local, state, and national advocacy organizations. We've also had over 900 individuals sign a petition asking for state and federal agencies to do more to protect their drinking water. Can you advance? So what are we asking EPA to do exactly, and what can they do? First and foremost, not one of these bullets, but we're asking EPA to investigate and figure out more precisely where the nitrate contamination is coming from. And then we've asked for specific remedies based on the immediate public health threat and also the long-term need to mitigate the sources of this contamination. For example, one of our requests is that if there's a known contaminated well, we're asking for a moratorium on new CAFOs or expansion of existing CAFOs near that contaminated well until the nitrate concentrations in that well begin to reach safe levels again. And you may hear incorrectly that we're asking EPA to step in and take over regulation of feedlots in this area or in Minnesota. But that's not how this works. EPA can work with state agencies that have jurisdiction over those items and ask state agencies to take actions that they are allowed to do under our legislation to remedy the crisis. But there's not going to be federal regulation of feedlots based on this information submission. There have not yet to date been any enforcement actions by EPA, but we are in regular communication with them. There is no mechanism under the Safe Drinking Water Act to force EPA to respond to this information submission. We provided information that we believe shows an imminent and substantial endangerment to human health caused by contamination of an underground source of drinking water. Now it's within EPA's discretion whether they act or not. We are also simultaneously considering or pursuing state-level solutions that I'm going to turn it back to Carly to talk about what we can pursue at a state level.
Thank you, Lee. So, as Lee said, we've also asked for EPA involvement to help coordinate and direct actions at the state and local level across the disjointed jurisdiction that she opened her slides with. These actions we can take now fall into two major buckets, public health and prevention. These are both areas where the legislature could take a lead role to enable some of the broad investments that we need to help curb this crisis. So first and foremost, public health. And this is the bucket of actions where more immediate relief is needed for people whose water supply is contaminated now through no fault of their own. This is particularly critical for private well owners who don't have the same regulatory protections that people on public water supplies have. So this could include, for example, a hazard assessment with a focus on pre-code wells. Many of the wells in the karst were dug before the Minnesota Well Code was in place and tend to be at a higher risk for contamination. It could include education and outreach partnership with local healthcare providers, or free access to laboratory analysis of water samples. The second bucket is prevention. And the focus here is really on the longer term measures that we need to put in place to ensure that this persistent contamination of groundwater aquifers does not continue into the next generation. And there is a focus here on the nitrogen sources that we've discussed, commercial fertilizer and manure, that we know are the major contributor to the problem. So this could include local controls like animal unit caps to limit the growth of feedlot operations. It could include grant programs to incentivize alternative manure management practices for smaller and mid-sized feedlots. And it could also mean that we need to look at the feedlot rules for vulnerable groundwater areas like the karst. So that wraps up my portion here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just end by saying, at the end of the day, we know that something needs to change. Everyone should have access to safe and clean drinking water, and right now they don't. And we know that you all on this subcommittee share that goal. So now it's time to do the work to figure out the best way to remedy this crisis. So thanks for having us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Mr. Stark, how are we looking on time? Would it be a better use of time to do questions and discussion after each presentation or at the end?
Madam Chair, I think it might be better to hold the questions until the other presenters have had a chance, and then we can open it up for questions.
Very well, thank you.
And with this, Sally, I'll ask if Mr. Broberg is online now.
Yes.
Yes, I am. Thank you. It says others have to stop screen share so that I can share my screen.
While you're doing that, I will welcome Mr. Broberg to give your presentation. Thank you for joining us today.
Great. Well, thank you. I apologize for not being able to be present today. I've got some medical appointments that I wouldn't have been able to get back to. But I got to tell you, when Zoom doesn't work first thing in the morning, it causes panic. Oh, my word. So I'm calmed down now. So thank you for your accommodation for this today. I'll be brief. My name is Jeff Broberg. I've discussed a lot of water issues with this committee before, and just a little introduction about what we do. We're really trying to educate and make sure well owners know that it's their responsibility for their well and their water quality. There's no one else there to come to their aid. And the best thing we have is our well code. But if you have a well that was drilled before that code, you're at a higher risk. And in this karst area, we believe that 60% of people have pre-code wells and are at risk, and we see that. We've been holding water clinics across the state. We've held 7 of them so far with over 1,000 participants. At those, we offer screening for chlorides and nitrates with equipment supplied by the Ag Department, funded by the Legacy Fund. And we have professional consultants, geologists, and hydrologists visit with the well owners. I visited with perhaps 200 well owners this year, and people are worried. When we have a waiting time between their submitting their test and them talking to the consultants about the results, and people are worried to death. They sit in the room and they're hand wringing, they're worried about what's going to cost. And we want to make sure that they understand there are safe, affordable ways to ensure drinking water. People default to the idea that they'll have to drill a new well. Well, that's untenable. I have a 400-foot deep well that has 17 parts per million nitrates. I've not been able to drink my water for over 20 years. I rely on reverse osmosis. It costs me about $1 a day. It's an affordable solution to a bad problem, but I've got to change those filters every year and be aware. So we've developed over 100 partners. Just Saturday, we had 50 partners in Elko New Market where we focused on arsenic. Over there, nitrate's not a risk. Arsenic is. About 20% of the wells have above health risk limits for arsenic, and we provided free arsenic testings for every guest. Between the counties and raising funds, we really think we are helping people understand this. The things we've learned, yes.
So sorry to interrupt. The view that we're seeing on the screen, it shows a red dialog box that's blocking part of your slides.
What is
so
that? Well, it wants me to try something new. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
I apologize for that. What we've learned is most private well owners don't test their well. The most frequent answer is never or over 10 years. It happens when they buy the property. And there's many people that have been on farms for generations and have not tested their wells. Most private well users don't understand aquifers, wells, water treatment, or water testing, and they're worried about their water. Many are fearful that the government will condemn their wells. That's not true. We've never had it happen in Minnesota, but that doesn't help with the safety. Most are concerned about the potential costs. Nitrate and pesticides are locally a problem in the karst and the central sands. We had in Elko New Market, the highest nitrate level was 2.1 within the range of natural arsenic. Arsenic's a problem, and they want to know what to do to be safe. This petition is about the karst. And you're familiar with these karst maps. It's southeast Minnesota where soils are thinner than 50 feet. We have rapid infiltration into the ground. On my farm, the water does not leave on the surface. It goes into a rocky ravine. It drains down to the Whitewater State Park, and it disappears into the ground. You can hear a sucking sound, literally, when the water flows into my rocky ravine. I'm drinking that water. There's a direct connection to the surface. We're some of the best studied geology in the world. And really this started because of the lagoon collapses in Lewiston and Altura, Belchester. And that induced the idea that we need geologic atlas, we need geologic sensitivity maps, we need studies, and we have some of the best studies in the world. We have karst experts that are world-renowned. And here I've just cited some of the most recent studies. But we've been doing this for 50 years. We've been studying the impact, the karst, the mapping, the flow, this pollution sensitivity, the age of the groundwater, nitrate studies that show the flow. Isotopic studies of groundwater and nitrates prove that most groundwater nitrates come from commercial fertilizers and manure. Water quality trends over 50 years, it gets worse all the time. and there's current references available. The thing that really motivated Minwoo was our recent One Watershed, One Plan approval, where everybody that responded, all the top reasons for being concerned were about drinking water, and the plan does nothing for drinking water. It proposes one water testing clinic over 10 years. It proposes doing 8 nutrient management plans a year over an area that's 500,000 acres. There is nothing in there that will help people with contaminated drinking water. And there's a failure to recognize that the conservation measures that we're proposing are helpful. We need them, but they're going to work over a decade or a generation. That doesn't help the young mother living on the old farm with an old well that hasn't tested their well and doesn't know the health risks. You saw the recent article about the cancer trends in Dodge County, County Road B. That's a karst area. That's the thing people are worried about. Well, a karst is fairly easy to understand with the work, the technical work that's been done. Here's a cross section of what our geology, layer cake geology looks like. The cracks starting at the top, going down. And here it assesses the age of the water, recent, mixed, and vintage. Recent water has been at the surface for in the last 50 years. And we know that's ever more contaminated. Work going back to 2009 showed in southeast Minnesota, when you looked at stream-based flow, water coming out of springs in the middle of the winter against percent of corn and soybeans, that if you have more than 60% row crops in a subwatershed, you're going to have more than 10 parts per million in the streams. We've had programs through the Minnesota Trout Association that tested those and confirmed that. And we had people bring water from samples in the middle of the winter, and we saw the same thing. We find springs that are now have 14 and 15 parts per million nitrates. A better view of the karst, one of the best programs going on is I think, is the Root River Field to Stream Partnership, part of Discovery Farms. They have been investigating for a number of years, and they have a great video and a poster that shows an artist's rendition of how this system works. It's not underground rivers. This is fractured bedrock where things rapidly infiltrate into the ground, end up discharging, and people have shallow wells, deep wells, and we know the details of this. This is a busy map. It's a geologic map from a 2014 study, but I want to display it. This cross section across here is very close to my well. My well is right here. This map displays the bedrock, the Prairie du Chien, down through the Shakopee Formation in the Jordan. Has a lot of data points here, but they were able to put together cross sections of that. This cross section I'm showing on the right-hand side where my well is, and it exactly shows the geology and the water issues with my well. Here's a detail of this. My well is 400 feet deep. My water level is at 180 feet deep. It goes down into the Jordan Aquifer on a plateau that occurs between the Middle Fork and the South Fork of the Whitewater watershed. There are no cities here. Hardly anybody lives here. I have 4 neighbors within a mile radius, plus 4,000 hogs. And more than 60% of this area is agriculture. And my neighbors aren't aware of how sensitive this is. We actually had a pretty good experience with our neighboring feedlot owner when he was up for a permit, and we described to him the areas that were most sensitive, that had rapid infiltration, where things could leach in, and he agreed not to spread his manure on those areas over 30 fields. We thought that was a huge success because he said, I didn't know this happened. I'm really glad you brought us these maps. I'm glad you showed us, and we can program this right into our manure spreading. So this is an area that is totally impacted by agriculture and a few septic systems. And down to this level, it is irretrievably contaminated. This contamination will not abate for decades, even if we stopped adding all of these inputs. This is an imminent threat because most people's wells are in this range. My solution would be to drill 600 feet. I'm 70 years old. I don't have any heirs. The chance of me doing that is less than zero. So I'm unfortunately going to have to leave the next owner a legacy, and I will most certainly seal the well before we sell the property. But this is a problem faced with people all over. We have people coming to our well clinics just concerned. A young mother and their baby said, I just moved into Grandpa's farm. And we have to sit down and tell them when their water is over the health risk limit and what they need to do. And they're shocked. They think it tastes good. Grandpa drank it his whole life. We should have good water. We're not. And we see a public health risk in all of the measurements of private wells that are coming. This is a public well supply in Utica. Wells, 3 wells total, that over time from 1960, every year the nitrate levels get higher. This has a DWSMA, a drinking water supply management area that extends principally to the south and east of the farm of this area. It's huge. It has 60 families that have private wells in that area. But the Safe Drinking Water Act is only addressing the public water supply, not the private wells. In our St. Charles Well Clinic, one guy brought in 17 samples from his neighbors. 10 were over the health risk limit. This is an imminent risk, and we aren't getting the help we need from the state or the local government. The SWCD is absent on this. What motivated me was one watershed, one plan, like I described. They're pitifully underfunded, underplanned, undercommunicated about this. And what we find is the barriers to improvement are mostly social. We have technical means to help this. We have things that are good. Legislature spent a lot of money last year on cover crops and perennial crops and things of that nature that help, but they're decades before they'll be effective. They're generations before they'll be effective. We have a lack of accurate risk management communication. We have aspirations, but no risk management. Tons of misinformation, mixed messages and misdirection. Paralysis by analysis, silos of water management, lack of planning and coordination, polarization and promotion. We bring these up to the state agencies and they say it's their job, someone else's. The US EPA gives the state authority to run these programs. We're asking them to help straighten this out, work with the agencies first and the landowners next. We all have an interest in this. Everybody wants clean water. The lack of information is legion. People don't understand their wells. People at the SWCDs don't understand the wells. They don't understand the water. They don't understand the risk of pre-code old wells. Misinformation. People are espousing the notion that protecting groundwater will devastate agriculture. How can we say that we're going to grow food for the world and pollute our own water? We need to protect ourselves first and have those measures in place. Asking the US EPA for help is not a scheme, an end around, or a maneuver to ignore LGUs or discard the progress. We want to add to the progress. We want to have that communication, that planning, that help, that assistance. And I think asking the US EPA for help is going to bring us resources rather than regulation. It can help straighten out the confusion we have among all of our agencies. And we simply do not have the capacity here. In Winona County, the SWCD, funded partially by the county doesn't even give them enough money for one FTE. They're dysfunctional by design, and we can't tolerate it. The mixed messaging, they say SWCDs and LGs are working in the right direction, but they haven't proven any of these to be effective in the time scale that is necessary for us to have safe drinking water at our kitchen sink. At the time that we need it, we're not getting that service. Those conservation experts are not health experts. I don't want my health information from the Ag Department or the SWCD. I want public health to do that. The Safe Drinking Water Act is a public health measure. Conservation experts are just not good spokesmen for public health. We're paralyzed by the analysis, and those are obvious. You've seen it, you hear it all the time, that our division of water management and governance is at cross purposes oftentimes. We have a lack of planning and implementation. How can we have a watershed plan where everybody reports that drinking water is the primary concern and the plan does nothing to help? It's an edge of field plan. How can we have this continued trend and people not be scared, not be angry, not be looking for solutions? People are all of those things, and they need that help. Hope is not a strategy. We have to have safe water at the kitchen tap. And protecting public health is not a finger-pointing game. We learned early at Minwoo that if we are trying to accuse people of contamination, that turns them off. They want to know what I can do. Other interests want to point fingers. Oh, these guys are trying to kill farming. Oh, these guys are wanting a national park. None of that is true. That is just trying to rabble-rouse and create problems of misdirection and polarization. This is not a rural versus urban divide. Every household deserves good water. Communication and planning, what can US EPA do? First, call a spade a spade. We have failed over 50 years of programs, $1 billion in Minnesota funds, to abate this problem or even turn it around in even a small measure. And we've been to the legislature for the last 4 years seeking help for private well owners and have never made it pass go because we have to start with the health committees. And they say, oh, that's a conservation problem. We can't even get a hearing. The US EPA looks at that and said, what are you guys doing? What are you doing? Why can't we focus on this public health? We need to assign priorities. We need free water testing. We need priority technical assistance. We need technical support. We might need rural water districts in these areas where drilling so deep is a problem. We need help. I want to end with a story in St. Charles. Farmer, who I know, a local dairy farmer. By the way, I think dairy farming is probably the best land use we have in this area. The biggest hope for improvement comes with dairies that grow alfalfa and do a good job of management. And they know their water. A local dairyman came in and he had 3 water samples. And I said, well, why are you here? You test your water all the time. And he said, yeah, I know. I test my water all the time. I have great water. But I'm worried about the 2 little girls who live across the street. These are the samples from their wells. He cared enough to go over there and collect the water sample. One had an old well, one had a new well, and he wanted to report to them whether their water was safe or not. That's the help we're asking for. This is not a finger-pointing game. This is not a denigration of agriculture. This is the reality of risk management. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We're proceeding along the agenda on the 4th item now. Mr. Flormo, Minnesota Agricultural Water Resources Center.
right, good morning. Good morning to the committee and those online, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm gonna slide my notes over here. So, first of all, I want to applaud the committee for starting down this path. This is, I think, the first of many discussions that are gonna happen on this topic. I also want to thank and acknowledge, I appreciate Mr. Broberg's quasi-retraction of many things that were in the petition. That I'm glad this isn't about denigrating and attacking farmers. And I'm glad that we've heard things today about supporting additional conservation efforts that farmers can do. Unfortunately, if you read through the actual petition, you'll find what I would describe and what many farmers have reported to me as they read through the petition as what they perceive as extremely denigrating towards agriculture. And so hopefully through this discussion today and any subsequent discussions, we can start to sort out what really is in play here. And, you know, specifically, if you look in the petition, there are many, many references to primary cause of this issue being industrial agriculture. And I was hoping to learn a little bit more today about what that means, because I really don't know what industrial agriculture is. I know that it's an industry. I know there are a lot of farmers in southeast Minnesota. But when I read the petition in the context that it's used, industrial sounds a bit negative. So what I want to do this morning, and what I was asked to do, was give a perspective or a reaction on behalf of Minnesota farmers. And so I want to share several stories, if you will, and introduce you to some real farmers from southeast Minnesota, so that you can find out how farmers are reacting to this petition and other pressures. So I want to let you meet some of the farmers I've had the great privilege of getting to know over the last 25 years. None of these names are real. The people are real and they're representative of many, many farmers in southeast Minnesota, but certainly I did not want to come into a public hearing testimony and name names of actual individuals for many reasons. So my friend Brent and his son raised corn, soybeans, alfalfa, grass, and beef cattle. A few years ago, they added cover crops to their rotation, hoping to build soil health and retain more nutrients and water on their farmland. I've had the opportunity of walking across some of their fields after a rain and just before dark, and the earthworm activity is almost unsettling. It's almost like the ground is alive. It seems to move beneath your feet. They've taken very real steps, not just recently, but over many years, to try to do the very best that they can, including very recently, within the last 6 to 10 years, the addition of cover crops. Emma and her husband milk cows and grow most of their own feed, much like the farm Jeff described. They practice double cropping, making full use of the available growing season in southeast Minnesota by following corn silage with rye, a winter annual that begins growing in the fall, takes a rest during the winter, and then grows very rapidly in the spring, providing forage for their dairy cattle. Again, soil health, nutrient management practices. Hank grows corn, soybeans, and hogs. In his farming operation, manure is the primary nutrient source, and it's very highly valued. He applies his swine manure to soybean ground after harvest, after soils have cooled to reduce nitrogen conversion, and he applies that manure at about 3/4 of his target nitrogen rate. This allows him to get that manure spread over more acres so that it's not just the nitrogen. There are many other characteristics of manure that are very beneficial to soil health, and so he gets manure on more of his acres, improving soil health and biological activity. He then side dresses the last needed nitrogen into that growing crop, usually in late May or early June, a practice that has allowed him to reduce overall nitrogen rates by about 20%. Karen is part of an 8th generation on her family farm, which raises corn, alfalfa, rye, grass, beef cattle, and hogs. She's part of a farm corporation typical of many Minnesota farm corporations that are made up solely of family members who work together on a farm. She also works part-time off the farm while she's working her way into the family business, which includes a sibling, her parents, an uncle, and her grandparents, all farming together. Oscar grows corn and soybeans, practices strip till, which means that only a small strip of soil is tilled to provide a seed bed for the growing crop, but leaving about 2/3 of the field undisturbed. This practice reduces soil erosion, helps improve soil health. He's also divided fields into management zones based on soil type so that he can apply just the right amount of nitrogen for each soil, utilizing variable rate application. Since 2008, his applied nitrogen rates have been reduced by about 1/3, with current average nitrogen rates of about 135 pounds per acre, and yields continue to grow. You might not know this, but a 200 bushel corn crop removes more than 150 pounds of nitrogen. 200 bushels, the plant actually contains 150 pounds of nitrogen. Diane grows corn and soybeans. She's experimenting with in-season nitrogen applications through a project supported by a grant she received from the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council. This is a small grant program that helps farmers try out different pieces of equipment or practices they might not otherwise be able to afford. The program requires documentation and sharing of their findings, usually through field days, so that other farmers can learn from them and about these new practices. Innovation grant participants usually work with an agronomist or their local SWCD, or NRCS staff, or university personnel. My friend Sam grows corn, soybeans, alfalfa, and beef with his cousin, his father, and an uncle. He uses precision technology to fine-tune nitrogen applications. He's a participant in the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Nutrient Management Initiative, very popular program in southeast Minnesota, a program in which farmers apply reduced rates of nitrogen on strips of corn on their fields to test where they are on the nitrogen yield curve to make sure they can avoid overapplication. Through this program, he has found that his nitrogen rates are actually very appropriate. So it hasn't allowed him to reduce rates, but it certainly makes him confident that he doesn't need to explore raising rates. So he's right in that spot where he should be. Carla and her husband grow corn and soybeans. They practice true no-till, meaning that their soil is not ever disturbed, and it hasn't been for more than 25 years. They apply all of the nitrogen needed for their corn crop in season, some with the planter at planting time, and the balance in 2 or 3 applications spread out through May and June. Again, this allows them to fine-tune their nitrogen rates based on the weather and other conditions. In a year like this, when a drought settles in, obviously your plant requirements are going to change. Sometimes for many farmers where it turned dry, that last nitrogen application was simply not applied. Again, improving nutrient efficiency. They use the precision technology tool that they use includes a weather model that calculates plant available nitrogen and crop updates daily, helping them decide how much and when nitrogen should be applied. Frank operates a dairy in partnership with his brother and sister. They grow most of their own feed, a mix of corn silage, alfalfa, and grasses. In 2019, they were certified through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Water Quality Certification Program. To become certified, they worked with their local SWCD technicians who evaluate all of their farming practices on all of their acres to ensure that they are using environmentally appropriate practices based on the best current information. After that initial review, they were certified for a period of 10 years, and there are reviews or check-ins throughout that period of certification. Norm grows corn, soybeans, sweet corn, peas, and green beans. A lot of diversity in southeast Minnesota. Depending on the schedule provided to him by the canning company, he modifies his practices to keep his fields green for as much of the season as possible. Some years this might mean relay cropping with an early crop of peas followed on the same field by sweet corn. Or it could be an early crop of sweet corn followed by green beans. And sometimes if there's growing season left afterwards and he can't relay crop, he simply plants a cover crop of winter rye, which is not intended for harvest. It just grows, provides soil organic matter, takes up nitrogen, converting into the organic form, and then it just melts back into the soil. In the spring, when he has a standing rye field, he uses a practice called planting green, in which he simply plants the subsequent crop into that growing rye, then he sprays the rye, and as the rye dies down, the emerging crop grows right up through it. It's a practice that 15 years ago was unheard of, and it's becoming much more popular. It reduces soil erosion, reduces nitrogen needs, and it's pretty cool to watch. All of these farmers I've talked about are real, though obviously I've given them random names. And they exemplify the hardworking, industrious men and women tending to their land and livestock. In fact, you probably would have had a hearing room full of farmers today, but it's October. This is our rush hour. And I've had many messages from farmers curious about what today was about, who would have liked to participate but are out combining right now. So it's our harvest season. These farmers exemplify what's going on in southeast Minnesota. They're not only providing for their families, they're supporting more than a quarter of the economy in that region. Farmers, the ones I've mentioned and others, are innovators. How are they reacting to this survey? Well, in large part, maybe with a little bit of anxiety. But the good news is they're continuing to do the innovation, the improvement in their operations that they've been doing for a long time. Specific to some of what you are going to be talking about over the next month or years, farmers wonder, what more can I do? And so we heard a little bit today about research needed, support for practices. I've worked within ag circles for more than a quarter of a century. And I really like to follow and study our state's farming history. And I'm constantly amazed at the effort our farmers are putting into improving sustainability and positioning their farm for the future. I work at this full time, and I work closely with farmers, and I really find it hard to keep up to them. So it doesn't surprise me that those with a limited understanding of agriculture and the relationship farmers have with the land would struggle to understand farmers. I also want to mention that all of these efforts that farmers are doing, farmers are the leaders, they're applying and implementing these practices on their land, but these efforts are also supported in very important ways through the Department of Agriculture, Board of Water and Soil Resources, USDA's NRCS, your local soil and water conservation districts, and University of Minnesota Extension. I'm not going to go into all their programs today, but as you learn more about these topics, I hope you would be able to engage all of those organizations as well. I also want to mention ways that farmers invest in research and implementation of good stewardship practices using their own dollars. I mentioned the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council's Innovation Grant Program earlier. That's one way. That's farmers investing in their own industry. Another one is a program called the Agricultural Fertilizer Research and Education Council, or AFREC. It's a program that collects a small fee for every ton of fertilizer sold in the state, and it amounts in current years to about $1 million annually. This fund is administered by the Department of Ag, with a council made up of farmer representatives, agronomists, and plant food providers, directing which programs to fund through a request for proposals process. AFRIC was created by the legislature in 2008, and current enabling legislation sunsets in 2025. This has become an important research mechanism for funding nutrient management funded by farmers, benefiting all Minnesotans. Another important area of evolution with regards to nitrogen management specifically is occurring within the University of Minnesota's nutrient management team. We sometimes talk about commercial fertilizer as if it's been hundreds and hundreds of years that farmers have been using it. It really didn't even become a thing until the 60s and 70s, so certainly less than a century. The role of our U of M nutrient management team has changed over the years. From early on, it was simply a message back in the 70s. Farmers at that time weren't even aware fertilizer existed in many cases. And I remember my grandfather, when the local co-op first came out and told him he should buy fertilizer, he refused. But then he tried a little bit and realized it really works. Not long after, our U of M folks began to realize we need to refine our message around getting the rates right, the timings right, and all those sorts of things. And as that has changed, nitrogen management on farms has changed. Statewide, more than 70% of nitrogen was applied in the fall 40 years ago. Today, that's less than 30%, as farmers strive for greater efficiency, reducing costs, more flexibility, and reducing nitrogen losses. N rates measured in pounds of N per bushel of corn continue to decline. That's good news for farmers and for all Minnesotans. We're becoming more efficient with nutrient applications. It's a common misconception that farmers apply nitrogen seeking the very highest yield. The reality is that while yields are often talked about, and yields are an important part of the formula that is farm profitability, the reality is that nitrogen selection is driven by profits, which means not buying and not applying excess nitrogen doesn't happen because it will not increase yield enough to pay for that additional nitrogen. University of Minnesota recommendations account for finding that spot on the yield curve where it optimizes end use, and research at our University of Minnesota and other places shows that that's also the point at which we minimize the amount of nitrogen left in the soil. We refer to it as residual nitrates that would be available for leaching or runoff. So farmers really are attempting to fine tune this. One of the challenges I will tell you that farmers have is that while we can calculate an exact perfect nitrogen rate for every field every year, we can't do it till the season's over. So there's some variability within that number. Our university system has a statistical method which they look at thousands of data points across many fields in our state, and it's coordinated with other Midwest states as well. It's actually housed, the program is housed at Iowa State University. And it recognizes that there is variability in the optimal N rate from year to year. Think about a year like this year. If you're in an area where drought was your most limiting factor, there's no doubt you would wish you hadn't put any seed, any nitrogen, any other inputs into that land. But you remember what the growing season was like back in May and early June. Some places very wet. Then it turned nice, and farmers were very optimistic about the way that the year was going to play out. And in fact, in many parts of the state, we're hearing good yields. But if you're in an area where yields were significantly impacted, your optimal N rate will be different. So I've thrown a lot of information at you in a very short time. You may be thinking, prove it. I would love to spend hours taking you to some of these farms, showing you data that they have, showing you data from the University of Minnesota and other places. And if you would like more detail on any of these, we can do that. I would also suggest that when you hear very broad, generalized statements suggesting things like widespread over-application, generalized stereotypes about farmers, you also think the same. Let's delve into it and prove it. Let's really analyze who we're talking about here. The petition also suggests that the state agencies have not acted properly. In recent years, our state agencies have taken several important steps that this wasn't decades ago that have already been proven ineffective. These are fairly recent efforts that we in agriculture believe can really contribute to solving some of these nitrate issues. Our livestock permitting requirements are among the strongest in the country, with significant changes made by PCA specifically to address nitrates just in the last 3 or 4 years. Our Ag Water Quality Certification Program is widely recognized in the country as an industry-leading program. We have nearly 1 million acres certified statewide, including more than 200,000 in the 8 counties of southeast Minnesota. And the groundwater protection rule in place since 2019 is the most assertive effort to address nitrates in groundwater in the nation. So I look forward to working with the state agencies, with petitioners, with you, with others, as we work to get more information and better understand the complicated science of groundwater in southeast Minnesota. As Mr. Broberg pointed out, it can take decades for these nitrate levels to change. I think there are also places where they might respond to some of the ag best practices faster. There are other places where other influences might be at play. And so there's a lot of science to be sorted through yet. I don't envy those of you who are here or online as legislators. You face some very diverse pressures, and I just want to applaud you for engaging, seeking more information, and I very much look forward to having more conversations with you as this plays out. Thank you for your time.
you very much for speaking and for your time too. Okay, so as we move along the agenda, we're on number 5, questions and feedback. It looks like we have some agency staff online. And if we could first have committee members ask their questions, we have about 25 minutes left of this meeting, so.
Madam Chair,
Not sure.
we do have a testifier.
Oh, okay.
Lori Cox is here. She's a citizen representing the Roots Return Heritage Farm. So Lori, if you would, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members, for allowing me to speak today with the subcommittee. I'm Lori Cox, and I own Roots Return Heritage Farm. The farm produces perennial fruits, annual vegetables, and herbs. I currently serve on advisory boards for my local Carver County WMO, Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program. We've been certified since 2016. Board of Directors for Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Ag at the U of M, and I'm newly appointed to the Board of Water and Soil Resources. I support and consult for new and emerging food farmers, land access, and environment within multiple network groups. There's around 4,000 specialty crop and produce growers like me in Minnesota, outnumbering now hog producers. I support the EPA petition for water issues. On my farm, we utilize conservation measures and organic practices to achieve healthy air, soil, water, and products. I no-till drill continuous cover crops and terminate using a roller crimper or mow. I use bone and blood meal mimicking earth recycling methods. I catch rainwater and hold up to 940 gallons with use of drip irrigation, which is highly efficient. I don't apply perennial herbicides, fungicides, or pesticides, which ruin the soil biota. Pollinators abound and crops rely on them. To live as a steward, we have to think of methods and life cycles, both used and created. Harm or good are derived from either. I've never thought of my land or operation reduced only to numbers on a spreadsheet. I would consider, however, poor environmental results a measure of my actions. Even with net positive actions, I don't qualify for federal subsidies for crops I grow, crop insurance safety nets, or uplifted price of my products when I sell. Subsidy and cost share conservation programs for farmers at federal and state levels are numerous, just like education and technical help. Some consider this ag socialism dependency. We all, in fact, subsidize ag pollution. Conservation and education budgets have increased for decades, and I've been a recipient of those. Farms are, of course, part of a whole landscape. Anything I do influences my family and those around me. No one is exempt. There are no boundaries for natural resources, and parcel lines are imaginary and, of course, non-existent underground. When the EPA petition was filed, I was relieved federal action was requested. We've taken on and regulated entire industries by creating and enforcing protective laws. Regulations were made and improvements occurred. State efforts for water quality are delayed, and data show efforts are largely ineffectual thus far. Agencies choose not to bring those responsible to account. Data are left out of presentation and educational materials. The last industry sector not fully regulated for environmental harm is agriculture. There are no checks and balances on how many inputs are applied perennially, how or where, how much manure can be absorbed in a given watershed, on what soils and what time of year. Are there cracks in earthen or concrete manure lagoons, and is runoff mitigated? How much drain tile is there, affecting water flow or reducing aquifer recharge? Where is drift damaging? Where farmers, organic farmers can lose 3 years of paid certification and revenue through no fault of their own. What tillage is used where, or where disposal of chemicals or treated seed occurs, even right on the farm. No one is checking. MDA just reported neonic-treated seed drift again in waters due to the majority of corn and soy seeds sold treated with neonics, which are lethally toxic to insects and systemic in plants and found in us. Measurements found them May through August, the highest activity and reproductive timeframe of pollinators, which my crops rely on. Science shows attempts to change ecosystems create resistance. People created more chemicals with the same promise, like an agricultural mouse wheel. People state poor farmers need all the help they can get, but how does hundreds of thousands of dollars in machinery, inputs, debt, and subsidies equal poor or the right to pollute? Agribusiness knows this too. There are true stewards and caretakers, to be sure, not nearly enough of them. We know continued practices, inputs, crop types, and areas that don't support them have taken their toll here and down through the Gulf of Mexico. State agencies don't support exemptions to pollute. Agribusiness and organizational lobbies refute data without counter data to support claims. Lawmakers and enforcers should take a deeper look at statutes specifying protections and rights. Polluting is not a right. Every choice I or anyone makes today in farming is just that, a choice. Generations of producers before us did not degrade natural resources or themselves. You heard previously about all agencies monitoring and reporting on ag pollution. MPA states all voluntary BMPs will not solve ag water pollution. Targeted actions are required. Voluntary is the problem indicator because of inconsistency. Do we allow manufacturing to curb their pollution voluntarily? People cannot drink their own water and municipalities are charging them, those who are affected. How is that equitable? How do we look at this? Tax on ag pollution may be a first step. Ag land in Minnesota pays the least percentage of property tax due to deferment and programs found under statute 273.111. I know because I own 2 ag parcels and are in those programs. No one is planning what reductions in a given area will be accomplished by a given time period for fishable, swimmable, drinkable water. The EPA filing was correct due to a lack of accountability from point and non-point sources. All taxpayers should not be on the hook for this, but those accountable should. State Statute 116B is environmental rights, which was adopted in 1971, and it reads, the legislature finds and declares that each person is entitled by right to the protection, preservation, and enhancement of air, water, land, and other natural resources located within the state, and that each person has the responsibility to contribute to the protection, preservation, and enhancement thereof. The legislature further declares its policy to create and maintain within the state conditions under which human beings and nature can exist in productive harmony in order that present and future generations may enjoy clean water, air, productive land, and other natural resources with which the state has been endowed. Maybe waiting for improvements isn't in statute, and hope, as you heard before, is not a strategy. I really appreciate everyone being here today. Thank you for having us, and thank you all again.
Thank you very much. Okay, hopefully I won't miss any more testifiers. Now a good time for questions and feedback.
Yes, Madam Chair, we have several representatives from Ag, Health, and the PCA, I believe, either in the room or on the Zoom. So maybe I could ask them to step to the table and so that we know how to address the questions. Thank you.
That sounds great, thank you. And just kind of for everybody's awareness, it's 10:13, we go until 10:30. We do still have a couple items from Mr. Stark as well as Met Council. So if we could just try to keep our questions concise and succinct, we can have a good, thoughtful discussion. So I believe Representative Fisher, are you first on the list?
Sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Hemmingson-Yager. Couple of questions. The first question I have, I think would go to folks from the MPCA is, if I remember right, we're talking about non-point source because we're dealing with agriculture. Can you tell us what are the tools out there and how that differentiates from point source dealing with pollution?
Yes. Good morning. Hopefully you can all see me. I can see me myself on the monitor, so I think you can. So the MPCA does have regulatory programs that are aimed at point source pollution. And so the types of water programs that we have would be our water permitting programs, which apply to like wastewater treatment facilities, both municipal and industrial. And it also applies to our confined animal feedlot program. And so CAFOs, sometimes they're called CAFOs. So CAFOs are feedlots. We do have a feedlot program. And so those are the regulatory tools that we can use. We do not have any kind of regulatory authority over, crop production. And so, questions about crop production or those kinds of activities would probably be more appropriate for the Department of Ag.
If this is Representative Fisher again. So from Department of Ag, would they be able to provide what tools that they have? It seems the MPCA has some control over feedlots, but what about Ag then? What does the Department of Ag have?
Representative, my name is Margaret Wagner, and I manage the fertilizer and non-point section at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So as we think about both regulatory and non-regulatory programs, we have a variety of programs within our pesticide and fertilizer management division. First, within our non-regulatory programs, we work on monitoring and support for implementation of practices. We have a history of private well testing and working really to promote conservation practice directly with outreach and education for farmers and stakeholders. So our statutory authority is to work directly to promote the adoption of best management practices here in Minnesota. We also have the groundwater protection rule, which is a new rule here in Minnesota that has both not regulatory and non-regulatory authority. And as implemented, we work directly with farmers to adopt conservation practices in vulnerable areas with groundwater. So I think, Josh, I may ask you to answer a question on our regulatory programs that really covers the distribution and sales and storage. But as we think about working directly with farmers, we're working to really promote best management practices directly on the farm.
Follow-up, are these all voluntary programs? Are there anywhere you come in and mandate that people have to do any of these practices?
Yeah, thanks. Let me clarify here. So the new groundwater protection rule starts in a voluntary phase. We have a very systematic approach and strategy to work in areas with elevated nitrate. And within that program, we take a period of time to really work for the adoption of those practices. If practices are not adopted within a drinking water supply management area on 80% of the cropland acres, or water quality gets worse in those areas, we will move to a regulatory phase of the groundwater protection rule. So it does have a regulatory phase, and under that regulatory program, we could require the adoption of practices in those areas.
Are there, at what point, is anyone in the regulatory phase now, any areas? And if not, what is the time frame before that is established under current rules?
Yeah, so this is a new rule that was adopted and went into effect in 2019. Criteria under the rule is a community with a drinking water supply management area where that community water supply has elevated nitrate. When it meets a threshold of 5.4 milligrams per liter of nitrate, it becomes a level 1 community in the rule. If that nitrate is elevated to 8 parts per million or projected to reach 10 parts per million or milligrams per liter over a 10-year period, it is as a level 2. All communities start in a voluntary level and then move to a regulatory level based on the criteria of BMP adoption or water quality results. Currently, we're working with 21 level 2 communities in Minnesota, and they are all in a voluntary level. We're actively working in those communities, so we really move through a very strategic process where we meet directly with farmers. We do farmer interviews, really understand current practices that are occurring. We use very sophisticated state-of-the-art computer modeling to understand the current practices relative to changes or new practice scenarios and the relative nitrate reduction that would occur. We work directly with local advisory teams, develop a list of best management practices that would be required in that area. And again, that requirement is that list of practices specific to that area needs to be required on 80% of those acres. And the timeline for that is when that BMP list is published, in no fewer than 3 growing seasons, we can move to a regulatory level under the rule. And we do that with a formal evaluation. We actually go out and survey the adoption of practices in each of these areas. As mentioned, we're working in 21 communities where that public water supply has elevated nitrate. So in each of those areas, we develop a list, work with farmers really to promote and adopt those practices, and then follow up with an evaluation, and also doing a water quality evaluation on that same time period. It's really about no less than 3 growing seasons. That gives time for the actual cropping season to evolve in that area. And also, we consider lag time when we think about that adoption or the water quality evaluation.
And so when I hear you mentioning communities, you're mentioning the public water supplies. So is there anything out there addressing the private wells when they're scattered outside of a community?
Yeah, so that's correct. The groundwater protection rule currently applies to drinking water supply management areas or public water supplies. That was based on a strategy that we had previously developed called the Nitrogen Fertilizer Management Plan. And that is really the state's blueprint to address elevated nitrates. And so within the Nitrogen Fertilizer Management Plan, we've outlined a very similar strategy, working directly with the ag community on the promotion and adoption of practices. And so in those areas, we're working on the township scale. Where we've prioritized our resources is to first work in level 2 communities, then level 1 communities under the groundwater protection rule, and then we'll move into townships as resources allow. However, we have piloted this approach. We've worked in 2 counties, both Sherburne and Morrison County, in clusters of townships with elevated nitrate, working through that same process of working directly with farmers, crop advisors, and other key stakeholders, often working directly with our local government partners to implement these strategies.
When you say townships, are you talking about community water supplies, or are you talking about the private well owners when you're talking townships?
Yeah, so as I talk about township and the nitrogen fertilizer management plan, that is working outside of community water supplies and is impacting directly private wells. Yeah, so that is at a different scale. The strategy is the same and the implementation boundaries are different.
So as I understand, there's 2 pilot areas that are working on private, but for the most part, the work is being done on public water supplies, correct?
Yes, using the strategy as outlined. I think I'd also really like to note that there's been other efforts to work directly with private well owners. The Department of Agriculture supported a first in the nation on private well testing, the township testing program. Over 7 years, the Department of Agriculture worked in areas with vulnerable groundwater, offering a free nitrate test to all private well owners. So that was offered to 90,000 private well owners across the state. A free nitrate test, and if nitrate was detected in those samples, we did a follow-up, again at no cost to that homeowner, with a trained hydrologist that would go out, retest the well, do a site inspection, do a nitrate and a pesticide test, and provide those results to homeowners. So that was completed in 2019, and all the results are available. That included the karst region, where over 21,800 private well owners were offered a free nitrate test and the follow-up assistance with that.
And then another question I have, having been around for a while, I know that some areas of the state have been much more receptive to testing happening than others. Has there been, have there been any areas of the state where some of the counties have been resistant to what is working out with the programs that we have now?
So overall, as we worked statewide and implemented the township testing program, we had about 30% response rate or interest rate from those private well owners. So as we offered 90,000 tests, we had about 32,000 private well owners that took advantage of that program.
Okay, and I'll stop my questions there. I know that there are others out there who've got questions, so thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple more on the list. Mr. Broker, I just want to acknowledge that I do see your hand raised, but for right now, I'm going to have you pause on any comments unless someone from the committee asks you a question. Representative Jacobs, please.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. So first of all, I'd have to say that I had a number of constituents contact me, and they were concerned with the process that we have here. I guess the meeting really not being posted until just 1 week ago. Of course, my constituents, I represent this area that we're talking about. They're busy with fall field work, so not really able to participate in this the way they want to. And so they just felt like the process was kind of disjointed. And so I've not only represent this area now, but for the last 10 years, I was county commissioner for this area. I've sat on the Winona County SWCD as a liaison for 10 years, member of the Whitewater Joint Powers Board in that area for 10 years. I sat on the Southeast Minnesota Water Resource Board for many years, and I actually helped develop the Ag Water Quality Certification Program that we've talked about quite a bit here. And of course, I implement all the best management practices of no-till, contour strips, erosion control structures, and cover crops. And so over those 10 years, I have carried a list with me because it grows and grows. The amount of organizations that are working on water in our area, more than 33 different groups working on water in Winona County. And fact of the matter is I've very seldom seen Mr. Broberg or any of these groups with their, boots on the ground working like all these other groups are. And with that, the amount of programs is just staggering. I'll list a few of them. I mean, to say that nothing is being done in the area, of course, that Ag Water Quality Program, the EQIP program, buffer laws, shoreline regulations, floodplain regulations, wetland districts, WACA, MPDS permitting, CRP programs, stormwater programs, cover crop programs, best management practices. The list goes on and on and on. So, I mean, to say that there's nothing being done in the area is a bit of a tough pill to swallow. I guess a couple of questions that I would have. So Mr. Broberg brought up about the Altura, Lewiston, and Utica wastewater lagoons having drained into the groundwater. And so coincidentally, if you triangulated the worst area of the problematic water, it would be right in the area of those 3 municipal ponds that disappeared into groundwater. So I'm wondering if I could get an answer to, do we know the effects of that? And can we prove that? I mean, are we pointing the finger? Of course, farmers want to do the right thing. We all want to do the right thing. But can farmers solve a problem that was caused by these 3 wastewater lagoons draining into our groundwater?
Question, just for my clarification, who do you want to direct that question to?
MPCA would be good.
Representative from MPCA still here?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the last question? I heard the front part, but then I was distracted for the actual question.
So I'm wondering about the effects specifically of the wastewater lagoon treatment ponds from Altura, Lewiston, and Utica draining into the groundwater. All 3 of those ponds disappeared into the groundwater within the last 15 years. My concern is that we're pointing the fingers squarely at farmers, and of course farmers should be doing the right things, but do we know what the effects are of those wastewater lagoons draining into that specific area?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the kind of catastrophic events that were kind of referred to, those happened quite some years ago. I mean, these are not ongoing, leakages or seepages that are currently happening. These wastewater ponds do discharge, to surface waters a couple times a year. That's very standard. So wastewater treatment facilities across the state do contribute to, the nitrogen loads that are within our surface waters that we find in the state. If you look at the data that it was in the 2014 nutrient reduction strategy, what it finds is that statewide wastewater treatment facilities represent only 10% of the nitrate that we find, or the nitrogen that we find in our surface waters. Down in the southeastern part of the state that we're talking about today, that percentage actually drops to only about 5%. So about 89% of the nitrogen that we find in our lakes and our streams down in southeastern Minnesota, probably mostly streams and rivers, is coming from cropland. And about 5% is coming from wastewater treatment facilities, and then a small amount is coming from a scattering of other sources. So that's the data that I have access to. I think you might have heard some slightly different numbers from some of the other presenters today, but those are the data that we use at the MPCA.
Well, following up on that, so certainly this wasn't in the last 5 years, but within the last 15 years that this happened. And Mr. Broberg had spoke to, if we stopped applying all nitrogen now, that it would still take decades before the problem would be abated, or it wouldn't be abated in decades. So we don't, do we know if the water that's put into the surface currently, do we know if that takes 1 year, 10 years, 50 years, or longer to reach the different depths of different wells?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very complicated question, and I think the answer is that it varies. I mean, what we do know is that down in southeastern Minnesota, as you've heard the various different presenters mention, there is a much greater fluidity of surface water making its way into groundwater. That's karst topography, that's karst geology, and so there's a very fluid connection there. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that a lot of what we find in our surface waters is making its way pretty quickly down into the groundwater. I do want to just kind of back up a little bit and just to provide a little bit more information that I want to make sure gets out there. And that is from the information that we have available at the MPCA, the nitrogen that's coming from cropland, which I mentioned, 89% of the nitrogen that we find in our surface waters is coming from cropland. And where that nitrogen is coming from is really three different sources. It's coming from fertilizer, it's coming from manure, and it's also coming from the soil itself, soil organic matter mineralization. And some of the studies that we're familiar with recognize that soil mineralization can actually add more nitrate than either fertilizer or manure into the soil profile each year. So it's really the combination of nitrogen from soil organic matter, fertilizer, and manure that really needs to be managed as a whole. And we really need strategies that get at all three of those nitrogen contributors to kind of affect a meaningful reduction to our groundwater. And so, that work can take a long time. I mean, it's taken decades for us to get to this point where we are, where we have all this nitrogen in groundwater. And it's probably going to take us time to change that. And so we have to think about the strategies in terms of short-term and long-term. And so we know there's a legitimate concern about, the drinking water for these citizens down in southeastern Minnesota, and we need to be thinking about a short-term solution that provides them with some kind of relief, that provides them with some way to protect their drinking water and, treat their drinking water if they need that. And then we also have to then work on these long-term strategies and actions. And we want those actions to really be targeted, and we want them to be science-based. And so that's what a lot of what you have heard today, people are talking about, is how do we target those actions? How do we know we're pressing on the right levers? And how do we make sure that we are accelerating the adoption of those practices in this area? So I just wanted to kind of provide some overarching information about the way we're thinking about this at the MPCA.
Thank you. President Jacobs, if you have any follow-up, Chair Weber, I see you have a question, and I would also see if you would be up for continuing this discussion into next month's meeting as well.
Yeah, I think it's a topic that certainly in my community, there's a lot of people who wish they could weigh in on it, no doubt about it. Maybe just one last.
I know,
follow-up.
Jacobs, I'm so sorry, but we are already 3 minutes over time. I really want to make sure Senator Weber gets his question asked, and we still have 3 more things on the agenda. Could you write it down, and maybe we can, with Senator Weber's, okay, since he's presiding next month, we could have some time on the agenda to more fully discuss this.
Yeah, as long as we're continuing the discussion into next month.
Totally appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think this is a discussion that needs to be ongoing, and certainly we can set aside some time for next month's meeting to continue with the questions that have been raised today. I simply wish to make a statement that early in the presentations today, there was comment made about with the animal manure that is generated by some facilities, people are still applying commercial fertilizer and going to 140, 50% or more of what is needed. And I just want to say, I don't think you're going to have to worry about those people too much longer with the costs of inputs these days if they're actually doing something that stupid, they're not going to be operating much longer. And all the animal people that I visit with in my district rely on that not in order to add to the amount of nitrogen they're adding to the soil, but to replace the commercial fertilizer that they have been buying. And so I would question that type of information, but also. And I was glad to see that there was someone there. I never saw anything on my screen as to indicating someone from the Department of Ag, and certainly they always need to be a part of this discussion as well. So with that, Madam Chair, I will stop and you may proceed with your agenda.
And yeah, I'll make sure we'll touch base afterwards to talk about how much time and who we need to make sure comes back next month. Okay, thank you everybody for your patience. If you will entertain maybe 4 more minutes to quickly go through our last few agenda items, I would greatly appreciate your patience and flexibility. So it looks like we have.
Madam Chair, thank you.
Sir.
We are running out of time. At our next meeting, I'll ask the Met Council folks if they would come back and talk to us about issues, plans, and solutions for water supply in the metro. It's an equally important topic, and I'm sorry that we've run out of time here today. We'll continue this topic at our next meeting, which is November 9th at 9 o'clock. November 6th, excuse me, at 9 o'clock. I had a number of issues that I wanted the members to be aware of that we should be talking about. I'll send those out in an email. I also had 2 bills that I'd like you to consider. One deals with support for voluntary well testing. The other is a slight amendment to the water appropriations priorities that would address some of the things we've seen in White Bear Lake around schools and hospitals. So with that, I'll get that out to the members and we'll continue that discussion. And I apologize to staff and the Met Council. Representative?
Yeah, my apologies too. This is clearly a very important topic and we need to make sure we devote the right time for it. Senator Weber.
Thank you. Just a correction, Madam Chair. I believe Mr. Stark indicated November 6th. The first Tuesday is November 7th, according to my calendar.
Great. Thank you for raising that. Okay. So thank you for the discussion on the presentations. Apologies to Met Council, but thank you for your flexibility. A lot to talk about, and next month we will continue this discussion. We'll hear from Met Council and see what else is on our agenda. So nothing further. We can adjourn this meeting.